With this, we will move on to our next esteemed panel, a very important session which would be discussing on funding and financing of education institution and role of the government. And we have some eminent speakers from across the country. And to do the honors, I would like to call upon the moderator, Dr. Atul Khosla, who's the founder and vice chancellor with the Shoolini University. Thank you very much, Dr. Atul, for joining us.
Hi, Sudhir. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm doing well. How are you, Doctor?
Absolutely.
You're doing well. Great. And we would also welcome Professor K. Rama Mohan Rao from Andhra Pradesh, who is Vice Chairman, AP State Council of Higher Education, Government of Andhra Pradesh. Welcome, Professor K. Rama Mohan Rao. We are also joined by Mr. Harsh Shah, CEO, India affiliate of Institute of Risk Management, UK. Thanks for joining us. And also Mr. Jayadev, Professor, Finance and Accounting Chair, Center for Capital Markets and Risk Management, IIM, Bangalore. And Dr. M. Manzoor Hussain, who is the Registrar with the Jawaharlal Nehru Technology University, Hyderabad. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Manzoor.
Thank you.
And also Mr. C. A. Subramanian, former Registrar with the Christ University. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Subramanian. With this, I would like to hand over the session to our moderator, Dr. Atul Khosla. Over to you, Dr. Atul.
Thank you very much, Sudhir, and welcome to this wonderful discussion. I think this is probably the most important thing for all of us as educationists. Where do we get money from? How do we build a great university, as all of us attempt to make? And I think we'll go around the table talking and getting ideas about what others are doing, and hopefully all of you in the audience will get some exciting thoughts. I'll just lay the context for a second over here. But quickly, as an introduction, my name is Atul Khosla. I'm the Vice Chancellor of Shoolini University. I'm also the founder. As a quick introduction, I'm a BTech from IIT Kanpur, did an MBA, and then spent many years in consulting with firms like McKinsey and Company. And finally, the education bug hit me. So 10 years back, I decided to stop making rich people richer and got into education. It's a topic very close to my heart. It's close to my heart because even the new education policy, as we think about it, aspires to increase our gross enrollment ratio from existing 26% to 50%. I think that's one context. The second context is that the quality of institutions in India, higher ed institutions from India.
I mean, even 3 lakhs and I think it's 2 lakhs. 2 or 3.
Apologies for that. Yeah, so I was talking about why is money needed. First, like I was saying, we need to enhance our gross enrollment ratio as mentioned in the new education policy from 26-27% to 50%. Second, our educational institutions need to move up the world ladder in terms of quality, in terms of rankings. Lots need to be done. But finally, and more importantly, I think in the broader context of higher education, India needs to build a platform that's comparable to the best in the world. So I was doing some back of the envelope calculations. And if we really have to get it right, we will need $1 trillion over the next 10 years to get our education system right. $1 trillion, that's a lot of money. To give the context of what $1 trillion means, the GDP of India today is give and take approximately $2 trillion. So that's half of India's GDP over 10 years. So lots of money needed by both the government and by private institutions to build a very robust education system. So that's the context. The challenges are huge. We all aspire to build great institutions. So the question is, where will this money come from? What is going to be the role of the government, either in the form of competitive grants, direct grants, or other indirect subsidies to India's education robust? So we have a great panel over here. We've got people from all different spheres. We've got professors from private universities. We've got Harsh, who is the CEO of a think tank. We've got Dr. Kumar, who is the Vice Chancellor of Sushant University. So we've got a set of individuals with different contexts and different perspectives. I'm going to pose my first question to all my panelists, but my request to all of them will be that we'll keep the answer to 5 minutes. We would like to pick up 2 or 3 questions and 2 or 3 answers from all of you. So my first question is, what do you think is the role of the government? And do you think the government is currently playing the role? And the context I'm going to ask each one of you is in the form of competitive grants. As a private university, Shoolini is a research-centric university, and I face a lot of problems with the government, seen as second-class citizens compared to the government institutions. So do you really believe the government will step up and put in some money and capital to make great institutions in India? Apart from, of course, the of eminence which are coming up. So my first question will be to Professor Rao Bhamidimarri. If you could answer these questions, 5 minutes, please, and we'll go around the table and then we'll get into the discussion. Over to you, Professor Rao.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to meet you all and indeed all the audience. I think this is a very difficult question you pose with no easy answers, not just for us in India, but all countries across the world. The education, if you go back long enough, the modern education systems, they essentially relied on public funding, donations primarily, or patronage of the kings and the rulers. But then the German university system, which essentially what we have today, was privately funded until pretty much the Second World War. If you go back to mid 15th century, the students paid the teachers only if they were happy with the lessons, particularly places like University of Paris. At the end of the day, what is the purpose of education? The education serves many purposes. One is, of course, the societal development. But on the other side, it also prepares people for education, economy, business, and also we cannot ignore the fact that there is a self-interest in all this. So the issue here is what is public good and what is private good of education. And again, the answer is not simple because it depends on what stage the society is at. If you look at the systems like US, UK, to lesser extent Canada and Australia, they benefited from, if you like, pretty much the wars, the First and Second World Wars. And then the investment into education, there was a purpose, not just societal development, but economic development. So the answer to this question is actually very complex. I don't want to spend too much time going into this. In New Zealand, I had an opportunity to do some analysis on who should pay for it, along with a committee, of course, not by myself. At the end of the day, it's a balance between what the individual who gets education gets, what is the economic benefit by supporting the business and the economy, but also more importantly, what society we want to live in. So it is, if you like, a combination of these factors and then judging what is the best arrangement we can come up with. I, for one, believe that there is a personal benefit, the individual's gain, or the family's gain in Eastern societies. So there must be a cost to be borne by the students. But then it is not just students alone who benefit from it, and therefore there is a public good. And therefore, the government should also invest, and this government investment should be higher based on the state at which the society is at. We are a young society in many ways. When we talk of the current type of education system. So the role of government is substantive, and to be fair, Indian government has invested substantially. The issue here is who is benefiting from it? Are we getting value for that money that is being invested? And so the analysis, I think, is what is missing here. Are we getting value for money that is going into the education and research from public purse? The account underneath that is the issue of accountability. What are the accountability mechanisms that exist in the public system and indeed the private system? The private sector is expanding rapidly, partly in response to the demand for quality and demand for provision. So I believe we need to engage in a discussion, particularly in the context of NEP, and come up with a model. There is work to be done in this, and then agree a model whereby what the students pay, what the government should invest, and more importantly, what is the role of private sector who benefit from the graduates for their employment. So I would leave this as an open answer really, but I think it is a combination of private sector investment, public sector investment, and individual cost. So I'll leave it there.
It's very well articulated. My personal opinion is that knowing how huge the demand side of capital is, especially to set up an institution, forget about the OPEX, but just the initial investment needed to start a university. There's no way the government has enough money to make that happen. So it's the question is, will private capital flow into private universities? And the question is why? Right now, private education is in the philanthropy sector. It's not for profit. And do we really expect so many philanthropists to be there in India that tons and tons of money will flow in? And that's going to be my question to Harsh. Harsh, I would love to hear your context, your perspective on whether the education system in India should be made for profit, or do you think the way it's running is appropriate?
Yeah, thanks for that question, and very good afternoon to all the respected panelists who've joined this session. I think from my perspective, you know, the government has done a great job by bringing in the entire national education policy. And if I build on from Professor Rao's comments about what are the sources of funds available to an institution, one is, of course, the grants given by the government. And then you have endowments and donations which flow in from the alumni network. And then you have the fees or the other sources of income which are typically funded by the students. So the first question that we need to challenge is, why should an education institution be run as a not-for-profit? And that's exactly what Dr. Khosla said. Why cannot it be a for-profit structure? And that boils down to our regulations where a university or a college is expected to run as a trust or a society only, making it difficult for them to raise capital from a private source. So today, the unfortunate part is universities with X acres of land and massive infrastructure, they have already raised so much capital and debt from a bank or an NBFC or a financial institution by mortgaging their school land or college property. Now that additional source of capital which is required to finance and fund research projects, technology, incubation centers, entrepreneurship initiatives, scaling up the campus, where do you get that from? You're not going to be in a position to raise private equity. You can't come up with an IPO. And the question is why? So I would just leave these two thoughts that at a structural level, do you think the regulations need to allow a private limited company or a public limited company to run a university or a college? And number two, coming from a private source, can we have a structure where private equity can flow into a university kind of a model? Why should an education institution operate as a not-for-profit?
So tell us a little bit about your institution, Harsh, and what is your funding model?
So, of course, the Institute of Risk Management is headquartered in the UK. We are the world's leading professional body for enterprise risk management qualifications and exams. Just like another professional body, we have level 1 to level 5 examinations. Established in 1986, we are also a not-for-profit body, and that comes with its own set of challenges, which I just highlighted. In India, we started the India initiative and the chapter with 360 exam centers so that students can appear for all the 5-level qualifications in India itself. And that is where exactly my point is coming from, that if an organization is allowed to operate as a for-profit entity, and this is applicable across the globe, right? Why do you recognize education institutions only by virtue of their constitution? Can we get rid of that phenomena where, I mean, look at these edtech players, all of them are operating under a private model, and people are passing those qualifications, degrees, examinations, and still being recognized for Industry 4.0. So that's one of the critical questions that we need to answer if a private source of capital were to flow to all the universities. Even if you see some of the default rates, I used to manage an NBFC prior to taking up the role of the India chapter of IRM. And I remember talking to some of the banks and financial institutions, the NPAs on an education loan, not a B2C loan, but a B2B loan. So if a university has taken a loan from a bank or an NBFC of 5 crore, 10 crore, 15 crore, the default rate is as high as 6 to 7%, which is a huge hit on the bank's balance sheet. And why that used to happen is because you've mortgaged the property, which does not hold any value, because you're not going to go to a university and liquidate that property. It's not going to generate any benefit. I mean, who's going to be a potential buyer? And there's always a large chunk of students who are still studying, whom you can't just vacate overnight just because the university has defaulted on a loan. So that's where the real root cause needs to be addressed. That is this the right model of funding? Is this the right model of allowing education institutions to suffer just because they have a certain complex structure under which they're working?
Thank you, Harsh. I was looking at the P&L of some of the largest universities of the world, especially Harvard and Stanford. And very interestingly, unlike India, only 30 to 40% of their revenue actually comes from student fees. A very large chunk actually comes from competitive grants from the government or industry. And that's going to be my question for Professor Rama Mohan Rao. My experience running a very research-centric university, which is private in India, is that we are treated as second-class citizens. It's very, very difficult to convince government bureaucrats, technocrats that quality research can happen in a private institution. Even if they give us grants, these are crumbs. For example, we've got a FIS grant at Shoolini from the DST, but the number was cut down to 10% of what we asked. So in that scenario, Professor Rama Mohan Rao, and I think you deal with a lot of funding, I'm sure you're part of committees. Do you think the context of government bureaucrats is going to change, especially with many universities doing some amazing work in research in other areas? Do you think the government will start trusting private universities? That's a question for you, sir. You are muted, Professor Rama Rao.
Thank you, Atul. Good afternoon, everybody. So nice to take part in this panel session. So as rightly mentioned by Atul, there are two important goals based on which we have to build up the story. One is the gross enrollment ratio increased to 50% as targeted by the NEP. And the second one is the quality, that I totally agree with the two basic goals for funding the educational institutions in the country. We have to take another background. The background is the Indian scenario where you have what kind of institutional setup we are having. So if you look at the total number of institutions in higher education, I confine to higher education first. There are about 50,000. And out of them, almost 78% of the institutions are in private sector. So very small part is with the public sector. And another important reading is that the college density, statewide if you look at, there are 28 colleges for every lakh population. And that also, the density is not uniform in all the states. In states like Karnataka, we have 53 colleges per 1 lakh eligible population. And if you go to Bihar, it is only 7. So the say population, if you divide urban and rural, we have greater parties in rural. And the GER is far less in SC, ST, and then OBC categories. So this is, in this perspective, the government role in financing and funding the institutions cannot be overemphasized. They have to be there. Then the issue is what kind of regulation you wanted to have on the education system. Do you want that all institutions should go under the control of the public governments, either by fully funding or partially funding, or even allowing them to run but under the regulation of the government? Or do you want to, as suggested by us, leave some institutions to run in a corporate model with a market model with profit making, or say demand supply situations, like based upon the quality of the services that are being delivered? The major concern, say, we have a perception that the public sector has some bureaucratic problems, and that is why the institution's performance is not up to. And private sector, if we allow it, they will do far better a job than what public sector can do. But looking at the situation that about 80% of the institutions are run by the private sector, but still the results are not that much qualitative. So still the outputs of these institutions are not accepted by the industry. So now the options are very simple. Say you have estimated, I must appreciate you, that we need $1 trillion investment to meet our targets of enrollment in the next 10 years. And say looking at the financial conditions of the government in any state and center, you can never expect that that much money will flow into this sector. So definitely you have to depend upon the investors. And then you have government funded institutions, institutions with grants from the government. And the third model is PPP, public-private participation model. But as you said, in whatever model it is, the government wanted an upper hand over the others. They wanted the institutions on the receiving end, following their rules and regulations and the conditions, whatever that they have. This is really creating a problem in managing the institutions. So we want them to have a trust or a society with a non-profit motive, and we want them to say invest from their own funds for as a service motive for the social good. But in the present generation of entrepreneurs or anybody, nobody wanted this kind of investment into it. That is why they have taken some say leverage from the policies, and they are running on a profit motive. Many organizations, we have commercialization of education is one of the serious problems that we are facing, despite all these conditions that are put in. So there must be a shift in government thinking towards the promotion of educational institutions in the country. So we should allow the people in, for example, the metros, the cities, where the private sector can establish the institutions and maintain quality and make the things happen. But when it comes to the rural part, where the private, it is not a good business model for any private sector, definitely the government should shoulder the major responsibility, and so they should say rise up to the level of the public sector in offering quality education. So this say is very important. When you go for a PPP, definitely there must be a mutual respect. There must be defined roles of public sector and private sector. There must be some kind of autonomy, accountability, and the assessment of the institutions must be on a identified KPIs.
Thank you,
So,
Professor Rao. This is very, very well articulated.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're talking about a blended model. You're talking about one size doesn't fit all, which is the right way ahead. And you spoke about city universities, and we are so lucky to have Dr. DNS Kumar Rao, Vice Chancellor of Sushant University with us, which is located in NCR. And you're founded by a large corporate, Dr. Kumar. So my question to you is, clearly, your founders have donated a lot of land and a lot of money to build a great university like yours. But do you see this as a movement going ahead? Do you see lots and lots of universities coming up in India, which are in the private sector, lots of people donating land, money, other resources to build great private institutions in the country? Is that something that's going to happen, or we are going to see the government actually supporting the growth of universities? What is your sense?
Well, it is up to the institutions. When I say institutions, universities, how you take it. I heard from learned colleagues in terms of finance, in terms of gross enrollment ratio and all. See, when you specifically mentioned about our university, Sushant University, backing by a private limited company who were into real estate. See, we are in the hub of industries, and we could not make good mark in the field of education, being for the last 30 years also. So there are reasons. It is not just our university, but others also. Basically, being in higher education, we need to understand what is higher about higher education. It is not just depending upon the students' fees as a revenue model. We need to dwell into the education, what else the education need to do. If you look at some of the universities in India and outside, the universities have named the name of the city. That is Bombay University, Pune University, Singapore University. Why? The reason being, they have considered the extension of education to other sectors of the economy. And when you do that, you can play the real role of higher education. And fortunately, we being in education for the last 30 years with a flagship program of architecture and also technology. And now Millennial City has emerged in Gurugram with 20,000 plus corporates. Recently, I have prepared a business plan. I may not be in the real sense in the business for the next 5 years business plan. And my revenue model is over a period of time, 40% coming from student fees and 60% coming from other sources of income. We have an opportunity in terms of continuing education. We can establish, incubation centers. We can have programs of DGR, Director General Resettlement. So like this, we have established in the recent past, during the last 1 year, 32 centers. So that way, a kind of, commercial activity, but not in true sense a commercial. wherein every activity has to be made as an incubation center. And that is where education prosperity you will be able to see. Now the question comes, we have so many IIMs and we have so many IITs. How many products we have created? How many patents that we have? The reason being, we have not made incubation centers much. We have not shared the revenue among the professors. The intellect which is there among our professors is remaining with the professors. But if the same professor goes abroad, he publishes several patents also and he commercializes also. And that is a model with which at Sushant University we are coming up. And we have already started doing that. Now let me give an example. If I have to enrich my programs, we tied up with Harvard Business School. Our students did not go.
I think we lost Dr. Kumar. So we'll come back to him later. Let's wait for a second. I think we lost him. Technology at its best and Murphy's Law at its best. I'm going to now come to Dr. Manzoor Hussain. And I'm going to give a couple of examples of very large top universities of the world. So if you look at University of Pennsylvania or Harvard or any of the large US universities, we see a very big difference in just the amount of resources that are put in. For example, UPenn has a total budget of $20 billion compared to the size of a typical good Indian university, including the IITs, of around 1,000 crores, which is probably to less than even $200 million. So for my first question is, how do you compete when there is such a disproportionate difference in competitive strength? That's one. But my main question is, do you really see such large, big institutions in the next 20 years coming up in India? China did that with Tsinghua University. Singapore has done that with NTU and NSU and NUS. Hong Kong has done that. So do you expect India also building very, very large universities like UPenn, Harvard, and pumping in tons and tons of money into these institutions? You're muted, sir.
Good afternoon to all the eminent panel members. I was just the previous panelist. They have given the basic models for revenue models for our various types of universities. As Dr. Khosla said, in next 20 years, what are we going to get the big campuses or education institutions for our in this Indian scenario? Before that, let me give a small example of my own university. I'm from Jawaharlal Nehru Technological University, Hyderabad. It is a public funded university. A couple of months back, AICT has given some new programs to start in computer science, BTech computer science. So all the private colleges affiliated to my university, as they are the private colleges, they have taken the decisions very fast, and around 30% colleges, around 3,000 new seats they have allotted in artificial intelligence and other new programs. Being one of the 50 years old university, one of the biggest university in South India, we could not take the decision to start this new program just because of this financial model what we are following. We are totally depending on the public funding. All the money required for our maintenance, for our regular requirements, we take from government. In most of the time when we put our request for some amount, hardly we will be getting around 20 to 25% of the fund. And the rest of the fund we are raising from the private institutes which are affiliated to my university. So the university, even though we have a very good group of people, researchers, and a lot of work we do in our academic development, but we are unable to plan for next 5 years or 10 years because we don't know whether we'll get the required funding from the government or the public or from the other sources. Whenever there is a short-term announcements are done by UGC and ACT, we are applying and we are getting funds for infrastructure development and other activities. So now, keeping these things in mind, my concern about this in next 20 years is probably this private sector, because already we have opened the doors for collaborating the foreign universities and private universities existing in India. If they collaborate each other and they come out with a bigger models, probably very few universities may come in next 20 years. But again, the fee structure or the cost of education in these universities will be very high. So when we as a public sector universities or the government universities, always we keep a common man in our discussion, and we plan all the activities for the common people. What is his paying capacity? What is the fee structure we can adapt? So I don't think that in government sector, such a big universities investing by the government in next maybe a decade or 2 decades is very difficult. If you see most of the models, the government is also providing one-time money at the beginning, maybe 1,000, 2,000 crores of rupees they are giving to start a big university or an institute. We are able to make the beginning, but to maintain it over a period of time, maybe after another 5 or 10 years, then the budget requirements are there, but we don't get any right source to get the funding. So most of the institutes, they are making a very good beginning, but they are not lasting for a long time with the same the development or with the same quality. And we
interrupt, but you made absolutely the right point. It's not just about getting the initial money, but it's also about the ability to run it and the longevity of it. And I'm going to bring in Professor Jayadev over here because I think he will really be able to answer this question. When the government took away funding from the IIMs, I understand, and I was reading that IIM Bangalore moved from classical MBA programs to executive education programs on the balance sheet in a very sizable way. So we'd love to hear from your journey, Professor Jayadev, and we'd love to hear how did IIM Bangalore go about building one of India's best management institutions despite not getting government funding?
Yeah. Okay. Good evening to all the panel members and all the participants. We can say financially we are an autonomous institute. We are not dependent upon the government resources. So one thing which we have strengthened in the last 15 years is executive education. A larger part of the corporate sector, people who are located in Bangalore and outside Bangalore and even some internationally also. A good amount of the executive education revenue is coming to the institute, which has been gradually going, except for this year, COVID. Otherwise, we have reached to more than 100 crores coming out of this executive education alone, which is a significant portion, which is taking care of a lot of our operating expenses, as well as a good amount of the core fund also we could able to bring. Second thing is, of course, we are charging fees for the PGP MBA flagship MBA program. And that is taking care of mostly our operating expenses relating to that program. So we don't have a great surplus out of that. Then second thing is faculty consulting and research grants coming from various agencies. At least 20 to 25% of the faculty are very active in different research programs and consulting projects, which are covering our overheads and getting a portion of it is going to the core fund also. So these are the two things. Recently, we started exploring the alumni also to fund our activities. So especially alumni are come forward to fund the scholarships to the students. Students are getting, we give around 6 to 7 crores for the financially weak students in reimbursing the fees. So we are getting the funds from the, we have created some type of the scholarships funding activities for them. So some alumni are funding, and alumni are funding in some other activities also, research grants also they are funding. So in that way, we could able to meet the requirements of various requirements coming out of these things, out of these sources. And we can proudly say that we have adequate surplus for retirement funds and gratuity pension funds and all that one. And good amount of cushion has been built up over a period of years, mainly contributed through the executive education and research and consulting activities.
Thank you, Jayadev. I think what you've laid out very, very crisply is that there are other means to fund your balance sheet. It's not just student fees in the traditional sense. And that's exactly what our dear friend from Sushant University was also talking about. Let's switch over to Professor Subramanian, who's the former registrar of Christ University. And we know that Christ University is one of India's better known private universities. They've been in the business for a very, very long time. And we'd love to hear your thinking, Professor Subramanian. How has Christ thought about funding growth? How have you as a former registrar contributed towards the growth of Christ University? And what is the future for Indian universities going forward? Over to you, C.S. Subramanian. Are you there? I think it's frozen. Let me again request him. Mr. Subramanian, are you there? Okay, so we will skip sir, and we'll probably try to get him back again. We have another 10 minutes to go. So probably the best thing we can do right now is to try to sum up our thoughts. We've had different perspectives from each one of you. We've got Harsh talking about privatization. We've got a blended model being spoken about by Professor Rama. We have Professor Jayadev speak about how you can do more exciting things beyond traditional student fees. Professor Rao spoke about that every size, one size doesn't fit all. You need to sort of evaluate the different models. So what we can do is we can take 2 minutes each. There are 5, 6 of us. I would love to hear your last thoughts. Let's keep financing out for a second. I think let's talk about how do we see the future of Indian higher education. So just 2 minutes, last thoughts on the future of India's higher education. And do we believe we can create institutions that will compete with the best in the West, like the UK and the US? And can we get foreign students, not from developing countries, but real developed countries like the US and UK, come and study in India? So 2 minutes of this question, first to you, Professor Rao, and then I'll go around the table. Over to you, Professor Rao.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. We heard, of course, the challenges each institution is facing. We have got a fantastic national education policy. What is needed is a national education strategy to follow that. And the strategy always requires resourcing. So the next step has to be a national education strategy. If there is a limit to how much we can do in one go, it can only be gradual, and it has to be prioritized. There is no point in scattering an approach. And within my limited time back in India, I'm beginning to observe that there is a distributive justice rather than a strategic investment. I think we need to move from that and then place our bets on what are important for Indian economy, business and society and its environment, and then prioritize those topics and channel the resources in a targeted way. In terms of the private education, it will continue to grow just to meet the demand. But my concern would be in the absence of a national quality assurance system in place, and also a strategic priorities being defined. Again, the private sector could very well disperse itself. So therefore, my view would be that we desperately need a national education strategy, and the priorities being clear, and whatever the resources public purse can afford be channeled in a prioritized way.
Thank you, Professor Rao. So well said. They say the devil is in the details. So the policy, the national education policy is great. It's all about implementation and how we strategically go about getting the best of it implemented across India. Harsh, your last thoughts and your vision for Indian universities for the next 5 years.
Great. Thanks for that. I feel there are 3 or 4 key areas that will drive the future of higher education. And first one being, I will talk from a risk perspective. We need to avoid the risk of automation in jobs. I was reading a report that by 2030 or 35, 60% of the jobs will be done by robots. So how do we ensure that, the human skills are just not taken at face value from a digital competency point of view, but the human skills per se have their own value. The second one is, how do we invest in personalized technology enhanced learning? So a blended learning model, definitely not only online. We're going to have to adapt to a physical classroom based model as well as an online model. Third one being, how do we engage with the private sector and the government with various innovative funding models, either by way of a structural change or new ways of financing. One example I can think of is, the 0% student financing scheme, which is taking a lot of importance in today's age, where the entire cash flows are upfronted and you get the money from the bank or the NBFCs by virtue of a 0% financing scheme. So that could be one of the innovative models which we could look at. And then really looking at some of the emerging trends, not just digital, but what are going to be the future of jobs in 2050? So how can higher education institutions engage with introducing more and more new age courses, including innovation, entrepreneurship, risk management, business continuity and planning, artificial intelligence. So I think these are the 4 broad buckets where I see a change in the higher education segment.
Thank you, Harsh. Professor K. Rama Rao, I'm going to come back to you at the end because I want to hear your views right at the end. So I'm first going to ask Professor Jayadev, especially in business school education, we've got some very good players coming in the private sector. Indian School of Business is a classical example. They're giving a lot of competition to the IIMs, but that's good because good institutions coming up in the private sector in business class education. Business school education. So do you see more private institutions coming up, doing well and becoming world-class, just like ISB? Is that something that you see, Professor Jayadev?
It is more private institutions are already there, but whether they become really a good quality, will they emerge as a quality institutions, or will they become really a competing institutions with the quality institutions already established, is a question mark, because resources and the commitment and the leadership required for these institutions is quite challenging. I would like to tell 2 points in general for the higher education. One, many state universities are facing the problem of lack of resources. Basically, they don't have funds, and hardly government funds are sufficient enough to meet the salaries and other minimum operating expenses. Over a period of time, many state universities have acquired lands and built up the buildings. And larger amount of the infrastructure is there. Each university is having not less than 100 acres of land, and land is available and buildings are built up. Now, question is that innovation is required. What is financialization of these physical resources? How to financialize these physical resources is a big question, because COVID is giving a question mark for us. What is the need of physical infrastructure? Is there a need of physical infrastructure? How much we need it, and where do we moderate it? and how much it is, what activities we are going to plan on the basis of this is very much important. So lot of these things, one in many countries, one aspect which is picking up, and in India also a couple of deals have taken place already. Student housing is one of the activities. And how do the universities think of student housing and making the financialization of these physical assets? I'm not selling, don't please, some people may immediately shout that, no, how do we sell these university assets? No, there is no need for selling the university assets. There are varieties of structured finance deals are available, like securitization is there, and raising of the funds from the market. In India, bond market is picking up. So using this bond market, many educational institutions can think of raising the resources through bonds. Australia, Canada, US, this is all popular thing.
I've already got Sudhir, glaring at me. We've got 3 more minutes. So you've hit the nail on the head. I can tell everyone over here that at Shoolini, we have monetized our student housing by a deal with Goldman Sachs. One way to get money in. But there are many, many more structured finance transactions that can happen. So one minute each. First to Professor Manzoor Hussain. Last thoughts, 1 minute. Sorry, we are in crunch of time. Dr. Hussain, you got a minute? You need to unmute, sir.
Yeah. India is having a potential to become an education hub, but we need a right strategy for that, and already established private institutes or universities are given a free hand to go for international collaborations. I think with this, if the government, if they give the right policies, I think we get in next 10 to 15 years, we will have a big educational institutions in India, because India is known for guru. We are the teachers in many nations, in many countries in Europe or in our African countries. Our teachers are working. Indians are known for teaching. We have the potential, but we need the right strategies and policies to implement.
Let's hope that happens. I'm very hopeful. Dr. Manzoor Hussain, lots of exciting things happening. I think especially University of Eminences that are coming up. So last thoughts from Professor K. Rama Mohana Rao. Would love to hear how, I hear that Andhra is very aggressive, getting private education into the state, also, trying to build great institutions. And you've done that in the past. You've done that in the private sector. I remember when I was at McKinsey, how Mr. N.T. Rama Rao, ran after us to get ISB into Hyderabad. It was just phenomenal. ISB was supposed to be in Bombay, and he just took it away from Bombay. So tell us more about 1 minute. How do you see Indian education happening? And do you see Andhra becoming the hub of education in India?
Yes, certainly sure. See, I do believe that India can become once again the Vishwaguru, and it has the potential, and high quality human capital is available. But what I see is there need to be a political will. Without political will, I don't think the NEPs and all that will not be executed. The NEP is just a policy, it is not a law. And education is in concurrent list, and the state governments have its own state, and the central government has its own state. So there is a political will is required. And then, yes, Andhra Pradesh is doing very well, particularly during the last 2 years. Many good things are happening. The government focusing on developing school education and higher education, also investing huge money and liberating things. And we are sure that with the kind of approach and political initiation, definitely we will, Andhra Pradesh will transform as an education hub. Thank you very much.
We all are looking up to Andhra Pradesh to be a pioneer in promoting higher ed in the country. I'll sum it up by saying India used to be a leader of world economics. In the 1400 AD, 600 years back, India contributed to around 30% of the world's GDP. And it happened because we also had great institutions of higher learning. We then lost our dominance in the world economics, I think largely because we never built or because we didn't have the opportunity to build great institutions. If we want to dominate the world, we need to build great universities. We need to build institutions of world eminence, I wouldn't say national eminence. And hopefully in the next 10 years, with the support of all of us, all of the people in this room, India will regain its place in the world. We'll have many, many more great Indian institutions in the top 100 universities of the world. And hopefully India will be a proud nation, an independent nation, and a very rich nation, but more importantly, a very happy nation. So thank you once again. We've got wonderful, wonderful thoughts coming from all of you. And it's been a pleasure to talk to all of you. And hopefully all of us can engage over WhatsApp or through social media and keep sharing our views. So Dhir, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atul. That was quite a positive note to wrap the session. I must, it's quite impressive how well researched you were on this particular theme. I can see you can connect India to the world, and you have ended this on a very positive note. It's quite impressive. And those who are looking for the funding and financing subject, this session is going to be very, very resourceful. Thank you very much. That was Dr. Atul Khosla, who's the founder and Vice Chancellor, Shoolini University. Thank you very much for joining us and moderating the session very, very well. Professor K. Rama Mohan Rao, Vice Chairman, Andhra Pradesh State Council of Higher Education, Government of Andhra Pradesh. And also we are joined by Harsh Shah, who's the CEO for India Affiliates of Institute of Risk Management, UK. Thanks for joining us, Harsh. And we are also joined by Mr. M. Jayadev, Professor Finance and Accounting, Chair, Center for Capital Markets and Risk Management, IIM Bangalore. Thank you very much, Mr. Jayadev. And Dr. M. Manzoor Hussain, Registrar with Jawaharlal Technology University, Hyderabad, Telangana. And also Professor Subramanian, former Registrar, Christ University. Thank you very much, everyone, for this wonderful and enriching session. Thanks for joining us.